Hi, it's Boyd Neal again, and this is SMD 102. I wanted to do a couple of things in this short video. I wanted to summarize some of what we've been talking about with respect to influence, touch a little bit on the components of a social web strategy, although that's going to be covered in other posts, in other courses rather. Talk a little bit about the concept of trust and also about the concepts of dialogue. Both trust and dialogue are critical to successful social web community management, critical to understanding what you can accomplish in a social web strategy, and hence I'm going to talk for a few minutes about it. But first, let's summarize the discussion and the readings with respect to influence, because I think it's a critical unit. The ebook Defining and Measuring Influence by Chuck Heyman, Lauren Vargas, and Teresa Basic is really an excellent book as a primer on influence. And I'm going to read a couple of sections, a couple of paragraphs from it, simply because they express them well, and I might as well take advantage of that. So here we go. Quote, "At the simplest level, influence is the ability to impact a person or thing in ways that inspire action. And influence is truly fluid. Much like trust, for businesses at least, influence takes work to develop and can be easily lost. The essence of influence is the same no matter where it's employed or experienced." And this is critical for us in a program that's looking at nonprofits, government agencies, and companies. The reactions to influence, though, and the gap between the cause and effect of an act of influence are the things that seem to be the most subject to nuance. And I think that what I hope that you accomplish in this week's discussion with respect to the social web strategy is taking a little bit of closer look at how what that nuance means when you're looking at nonprofits, governments, and companies. So nuance is a critical thing in reviewing social web influence. The second thing is that what is social web influence a function of? Well, it's a function of four things, according to the ebook, and I agree with this: trust, authority, value, and connection. The other thing the book says, which I think is quite important for understanding influence, is that influence can be powerful no matter the size of your network. In fact, the size of your network might only be weakly linked to your ability to cause an effect. So Justin Bieber really has little influence, except perhaps in hairstyles and buying his music. Beyond that, the fact that he has millions of followers on Twitter means little for the kind of influence he has over most of the important decisions in our life. The fact is that if you do things that connect people to you in a meaningful and moving way, you'll influence their behavior, or the behavior rather of their networks. So really, an influencer doesn't require a large number of followers, for example. It requires someone who provides meaningful and moving information. And that's an important understanding when it comes to influencers. But how do they differ among companies, governments, and nonprofits? Well, again, I hope that you give some thought to it as you're addressing the issue of social web strategies in the coming week of the course, or this week of the course. But just in big picture terms, companies will be looking to find influencers who will encourage connection with your brand or a buying behavior. Nonprofits, on the other hand, are probably looking for influencers who will become champions of their cause. And governments are often looking to influencers to be people who will be supporters of their initiatives in a community. They're people who are willing to represent a policy or idea in a community that the government seeks to influence. So those in the broadest terms are the differences between the kind of influencers that a company will be looking for, a nonprofit, or a government agency. Influence 50, which you can search on Google, has a very interesting graph in which they look at a number of roles that influencers can play. Influencers can be everything from an idea planter, that is somebody who picks up an idea and carries it, runs with it, develops it, expands it, all the way to people like recommenders or persuaders, negotiators or validators. And depending on where you are on the spectrum of of marketing, if you're a company, on the spectrum of the development of your cause, if you're a nonprofit, or on the spectrum of beginning to engage with an agency, the type of influencer that you might need on the social web will depend. So between when you decide to do something and when you decide what to do, you might have different influencers all along the way. So keep that in mind and maybe take a look at the influence. Now, influence50.com and their graph. The second thing I want to talk a bit about is just the components of a social media plan, since we're going to be talking a little bit more about it. Although you'll probably go into greater depth in another course on social media strategy, just a couple of things that I think are significant when we're looking at the difference between nonprofits, governments, and companies in the way they develop strategies. The first thing, of course, you've got to define is the organizational objective. For a business, what is the business objective, for example? Then you establish a social program objective. You say, how can social media help me accomplish that business goal or that nonprofit goal or that government department goal? You keep in mind, by the way, when you're doing that, when you're thinking about it, that social media participation continuum that we talked about in week 1 of the course. That is connection, engagement, influence, and action. Those are the kinds of things that you can do on the social web, and you need to think of your social program objectives within that context. Then you define who your targets are. Where can you find the intended users or the intended people that you want to contact, your target audience? Where do they share information through social media? So you may think a Facebook program is the best approach, but if the way in which the community you're wanting to reach talks to each other and shares information is Twitter, then obviously you don't want to build a Facebook program necessarily. You need to identify who are the influencers in those networks, and there are many, many, many techniques that can be used in order to define influencers. But at the basic level, you're looking at who are your proponents and who are your opponents, who are the people that might cause you some trouble. In particular, you need to look at whether or not media will be mainstream media, legacy media as we like to call it, or I like to call it. I don't know who else does, but I like to call it legacy media. Will they be an influencer in this program, or will the influencers that you find be influential in affecting the way in which the media sees an issue? Then you define your approach. You define who will be your spokesperson, your community manager, who will be the face of the social program. You determine what's the best way to employ social media tools. Do you want it to be episodic, strategic, surgical? Do you want an ongoing commitment to build relationships over time, which is obviously the better approach to a social media strategy? Are you going to push content out? Well, I hope not for very long, because that's the least effective use of social media, really. Rather, are you going to try and pull stakeholders into your conversations? And what voice or tone are you going to take in doing so? And then you come to what are the best tools, given the target audience, your objectives, your approach, which tools do you select? And frankly, sometimes you might even decide that social web tools aren't necessary. Sometimes interaction and community management is all that's really required in order to develop a program. And then finally, of course, you measure. You set the targets in advance that you're trying to reach, because you can't measure something if you don't know where you're starting from. So you set targets like quantity, quality, content, authority, engagement, and you establish metrics for each of those. But first, you've got to know where you're starting. For example, with engagement, if you have X number of interactions on a Facebook post per week, and you've instituted a new Facebook program, you want to be able to say, I want to increase the number of interactions I have with my content by X% over a period of time. So those are the basic elements of a strategy. Finally, 2 other things. I want to talk a little bit about trust. Trust is something that it's what your, it's, how can I put it? It's the sine qua non, to use the Latin term, for any company, government, or nonprofit social program. Influencers, constituents, customers, and clients won't trust your presence on the social web. If they don't trust your presence, rather, on the social web, then your programs will be weaker or fail. So a lot of the goal that you should have in building a social web program is building trust. Trust is an outcome. It's not an origin, for example. Trust is based on shared values and norms that are expressed in concrete social relationships. Trust is founded on interaction and reciprocity. This, by the way, is from a book called Trust by Francis Fukuyama, historian, who's written a number of nonfiction books. And what's really important to remember is that trust can be depleted and built, but it depends on engagement. So trust can be depleted or built, but it depends on the level of engagement. And trust can be built if you allow people, for example, input into what kind of information that they want to see. So instead of pushing content on the social web, perhaps you can explore what kind of information people would like to get from you. They also feel more trusting if you've involved them in the timing of the release of information. In other words, what you're doing is you're asking people questions, because by asking them questions and then taking what they recommend and putting it into your social web program, you will build trust. Finally, a comment on dialogue. Dialogue, we often talk about conversation on the social web. It's probably one of the most overused words. What many organizations think of as conversation is actually monologue, me talking to you, telling you how important I am and what I do, that kind of thing. You can often tell what people really feel about conversation when you look at the difference between their followers and the number they're following on Twitter. And if you got these massive disconnects between numbers in those areas, then you'll know that perhaps what people are saying is that I want you to follow me because I've got some fabulous stuff to say, but really I don't care about you. That's not dialogue. That's not going to lead to dialogue. What dialogue is about is, and this is from a book by William Isaacs called Dialogue and the Art of Thinking Together in Relationship. He says dialogue is a simple but profound capacity to listen. Listening requires we not only hear the words, but also embrace, accept, and gradually let go of our own inner clamoring in order that we can actually hear. So monitoring conversation is fine, but when you're engaging, you got to remember that dialogue is about letting go of what your goal is, listening to what someone is saying, and then contributing back to them. He talks about 4 elements of dialogue: voicing, respecting, listening, and suspending. And essentially what it's talking about is being clear about what needs to be said, listening to someone without resistance or imposition of your own values, being aware of the integrity of their position, their point of view, be aware that you can't fully understand their position, and then suspending your assumptions and judgments and your own certainty of your point of view. I think if we adopted such an approach to dialogue online, companies and organizations, nonprofits, and governments would find that they build much deeper levels of trust. So there you go. I hope that's useful content for you. And again, please be in touch if you have any questions. I've marked your blog posts, commented on them, and I'd be happy to discuss them with you if you want to get in touch with me by email. Cheers.